Hey guys, welcome back to this series of tutorial on how to program a salary calculator. In the previous tutorial, we created our menu and saw how to process the user input. In this tutorial, we're now going to implement the code on how to handle each case. If you like this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up, drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to CMTEQ channel for more tutorial like this. Now, in this tutorial, we are going to process each one of these cases if times allow us. The first case here is for hours, when the user input the hours. Now if the user input character A, now we're displaying hours, but now we need to ask the user to please enter the number of hours. So now the first thing to do here is let's first display hours in the middle of the screen. As you can see, it's appearing on the top corner. Now if you watch the previous tutorial, we created a function, this function, which is a go to xy. So this function basically let us navigate on our console applications. So we're going to call that function again. As you can see, the IntelliSense is working for us. Then we pass the coordinate for x 10 and then for y we say 8. Then let's run again and check character A. Now hours is standing right where we want it to be at least. Okay, then we can say then to ask the question nicely, please enter the number of hours worked, semicolon there. Okay, now we're asking the user to enter the number of hours. Let's try that again. Character A, boom. Okay, so now the cursor is blinking and waiting for us to enter the number of hours. Let's just remove the, but then we need to process what the user will input. So in order to do that, we need to make use of the scanf functions. So that's the function that scan integer, scanf. Now remember, we use the function getChar. Now this function only get characters. Now if we want to get integer, we use this function here, scanf. Now we have to format specify the character, the integers that are going to be input. So we say we expecting the user to input integers of short or long. So the H is for short and D is for integers. And then we want the values that the user is going to input to be stored into hours. Now in order for that value to be stored, we have to dereference it. And that is by including that end. Now, but if we run the program now, the program will crash because we don't have hours yet declared in our program. So we come here and then we declare it. So we just say unsigned short hours. We can initialize it to 0, no problem. Now we run the program will work, but we won't know if indeed we are receiving what the user is inputting. Just for commercial reason, we can write another print statement here. Okay, print, and then we want to capture what the user is inputting and display it on our screen. So %d, and then we say hours. Then let's just, for the fun of it, we say you have entered X amount of hours. Let's try the program. Enter character A. Okay, please enter the number of hours worked. So I enter 45, click enter, then you say you have enter. You see it's going in very fast. Let's try that again. You have entered 45. Now this is the time delay is exactly the same 2 seconds. We can increase that if we want to. Okay, so now we know that the 45 hours is being now, whatever the value of the worked hours the user enter is now being stored in this variable here. And now we don't have any program or code here to process it. So this is the code. But now you can see that we will be writing all this code on each one of these cases. So that's going to be a bit crowded on the main function here. So we want the main function to be clean. That's the reason why we have libraries defined where we can put in functions. So basically what we can do is to just take all of this, place it in the function. So when the user enter character A, we basically just going to call the function, and the function in the case will handle that. So let's see how to implement that. So to do that, we're going to create a function in our library where we're having our functions here. So we're going to create a functions of type unsigned short. So that's what the function is going to be returned. So that's a return type of the function. It's an unsigned short. Then what's the name of the function? We say, well, we call it acquire hours. Acquire hours. So basically, the user need to acquire the number of worked hours. I mean, the program need to acquire the number of worked hours. So this is now our functions. Now remember, this function is not accepting any input, just like that. So in order to do our function prototype, we just copy that and go into our header files here, and then we just tap there. So now our functions got a prototype, and we go back in here, then we can start typing our functions before we can call it there. Or let's just first call it. Okay, or let's copy everything and then just add it into the functions. The reason why we've created the function is basically so we can copy everything and place it in here. Okay, now we know we're going to jump into these functions, and this is what we're going to do. But now these functions is an unsigned short function, so which means it's expecting a return. So what are we returning here? We are returning hours. So that's what we're returning from the function, hours. But now we know that the hours is not defined here in the program. We only defined hours here. It's only declared here. So what we have to do is we have to copy this one as well. But we're going to leave that one there yet, and we're going to just copy this one here like that. Now hours have been declared and initialized to 0, and the code will run as we've already tested it on the main functions. Now this one here, we're going to call it hours work, and this is going to be important for us to process some of the cases that's going to happen here, because remember, every other calculation is going to happen based on what we entered. So we say hours work, but we cannot initialize this thing to 0. So let's just hard code, for instance, for a 40 hours per week. So let's say the user is working 40 hours a week. Okay, standard. So this is hard code. Then we're going to have functions that's now going to use this value to process some other calculation like tax, UIF, and so forth. But now this is a hard code value 40. But in case a user enter a different value, we want to be able to receive what the user will enter, something other than 40 hours. Something other than 40 hours. So how do we process it? We're going to just assign the value that will be returned by the function that we created on our library. The function name is acquired hours. You can see the function is already coming there. So the function is not taking any input. So the function's acquired hours is going to return a value, and that is the value we're going to enter, and that's the scanf will scan for us, and we are passing it here, and we are passing it to hours, and we're returning hours, and that return value is now being assigned here. That's only if the user hit the character A, then we do that. But if the user doesn't, so it's automatically going to calculate with the 40 hours weekly work. Okay, so that's basically what's going to happen there. Now let's test this program if it's still working. Okay, character A, enter number of worked hours. Please enter the number of hours worked. So I say 45. It say you have entered 45. Now you can clearly see the program is still working perfectly. We've removed all the code that was there and we've put it here. That's how our program is still working, because we've created a library. So this section is now completed. Now we have to move on to the next sections. So that is to calculate the tax. Now, in order to calculate Now, in order to calculate the tax, you have to know what is your gross salary, because it's based on your gross salaries, then you can fall into a different tax bracket. So the first thing to do, we have to calculate what's the gross salary. Now, the gross salaries, we calculate it based on the number of hours the person worked and what's the rate, that is, he's being paid per hour. So that is important. So what is being paid per hour times the number of hours worked, that will be the gross salary. So we are going to now define or declare or hard code the rate value, because that we cannot input it. The user cannot be asked to input it. That is already hard coded by the company. So we're going to define a micro, and on that micro we're going to give the value of the rate. So we say define, we call it rate, okay, and then let's say how much the person is being paid per hour. So then we say 250. We say 250 is our rate. Then we need also to define what's the tax bracket or the tax percentage. Now these are just arbitrary numbers we are going to be taking there. It's not really verified numbers. Now let's say the tax rate that the taxpayer must pay. So we call it tax rate. We say tax rate is about 25% of your total gross salary. So that is 0.25, like that. So we've defined the rate to be 250 and we define the tax rate to be 25% of your pay. So this is quite brutal, but yeah, some countries can actually go even higher, because it depends on how much you pay. The more you pay, the more money you get, the more taxations comes into play. So we just say, we're being brutal, that 25% of your pay is going to your income tax. Okay, so now that we've defined these values already, what do we need to do then? We need to use them into our program. So we're going to be operating here on the tax case. So we want to be able to, once the user enter the number of worked hours, or we use a hard code value, we want to calculate what the gross salary is, and from there we can calculate, then deduce the value of the tax to pay. So the first thing to do, we're going to write the small functions that are going to calculate the gross salary. So once again, we come back into our library, and then we're going to hard code our functions. Now this is where you decide what your function is going to be. We've said this one is an unsigned short. Let's just say, because the gross salary is going to be a big value, it's a big number. So now we are going to make it a double, meaning it's going to be a big number. So we say double, and then we call the name of the functions. So we say calc. Okay, so this function is going to calculate the gross salary. Now the function need to take an input. So what is the input that the function is going to take? The function is going to take the number of worked hours as an input. Now we know that the number of worked hours is going to be an unsigned short, as we have declared it here on the main functions. Hours worked, it's an unsigned short. So which means the input that this function is going to be expecting must also be the same, unsigned short hours. Now we can just either write this where we say return, then we say rate times hours. Okay, now when we return this value, we are already getting this operation done. We're getting this operation done, and that's the value we're returning. It's going to work. It's not going to give a problem. But in order for us to make it at least a clean, neatly understandable code, we have to declare a variable that is going to hold the value that must be returned. So we can say double, we say hours worked, and then we say hours worked is equal to rate times hours, like that. And then we want to return hours worked. So when the function is called, the user is passing the number of hours worked here in the functions, and that number is then being multiplied with the rated value here, with the rated value that the user is being paid per hour, and then we're returning the sum here. But now if we run it, as always, the function is going to crash. So what we need to do is to create the function prototype, because our program is not going to know what's going on here. So we have to create the function prototype again there. So that's the function prototype unsigned short. Okay, so now that we've included our function prototype and the function is accepting an input from the user of unsigned short, now we can go ahead and call this function here. But now you remember we are going to process the gross salary. So which means just like we did here on the hours worked, we also need to do exactly the same thing so that we can store the value of the gross salary. So what do? We're going to define a variable that is going to hold the gross salary. So we call it double, and then we say gross salary. We can initialize it to be 0, and then we're going to come here and then we say gross salary is equal to the function that we've just created. What's the function name? That's a calculate the gross salary, so it's calc gross salary, that is that. And then we have to pass the value as the number of hours worked by the user. So that number, we are acquiring it here from this value here, or that one that is already hard coded. So it's exactly the same thing. So we're passing that here. So that's basically it. So when the program run, when the user hit text, we are processing this here. We're passing the number of worked hours, and we're calling the functions, and this function is calculating it for us and is returning the value of the gross salary. Now all we have to do now is to display the value of the gross salary on our screen. Just like we did on this function here, we display the number of worked hours when the user input it. We're just going to do the same thing here so that at least we know that the user have just entered the number on the gross salaries there. We're just going to do it like that, and then we're going to now replace that with gross salary. So now the function is going to print the value of the gross salary as worked by the user for a weekly pay. So let's run this program and then see what's going to be the result. Okay, so we say A, let's say 45. Say you've entered 45 hours. Okay, now let's check B and try. You have entered 0. There is a problem in this program. Let's find out. Let's see. Okay, it says you have entered. Okay, let's first of all, let's just fix here. Let's say your gross salary is, now the problem is a format specifier. Percentage D right here is for integer. Okay, but now we know that this value is not an integer. That value is returning a double. So if we don't use a correct format here, we're not going to get the correct value. So what we need to do here is we just make a LF. LF is a format specifier for double in C programming. Now I'm certain we're not going to get 0 anymore. So let's see. Okay, A, enter 45. Okay, and then B. You can see we're getting 112. Now the thing is a bit too fast. Let's just increase the number of seconds, make it 4 seconds so we can be able to read the values there. 45. Okay, and then B. You say your gross salary is 11,250. You can see we have quite a couple of zeros at the end there, but we're going to fix it by limiting the number of zeros that can be displayed after the comma. Okay guys, we're going to stop these videos, this tutorial here before it gets too long. Please stay tuned for the next tutorial. Drop a comment below in the comment line, and don't forget to give the thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much. Cheers.